So Paul's emphatic message through this letter is that when Jesus set them free, he set them free entirely. Not only from the past, but he also set them free from works. He set them free from religious people who would come and say, you are failing. You are not measuring up to God. You are not adequate for him. They were being saved and delivered from that message that wanted to weigh them down, that yoke of slavery. And he challenged them to not let anybody, no matter who they were, rob them of that beautiful simplicity of the gospel. A lot of times you might think at this point, I'm going to jump off of Galatians and start talking to you about being very careful with all the false gospels that are out there in the church today. And people don't have the right gospel, and they need to teach this way, and they need to teach the gospel this way, and they need to teach the gospel this way. But listen, Paul wasn't writing about false gospels traveling around in 2023. That's not what he meant. In fact, the false gospel that he was talking about specifically was Judaism and the old covenant and the law. And it cannot be about anything that's happening today, and I will use the word correctly, because literally there are no priests, sacrificial systems, laws, or a culture that is underneath those that we have experience in right now in our culture in Medford, Oregon. It is written to them against those who are coming from Jerusalem. That is the false gospel that he was talking about. And if somebody wants to use this passage to launch off and write books and teach sermon series about the false gospels that are being preached in America today, that's not what it's talking about. If anything, it's actually talking specifically to the person that would be doing that, because it is against those who would say, you have to believe a certain way, and the way that you're believing is inadequate. It doesn't measure up. You need to jump through these hoops. You need to get it right if you really want to be saved by Jesus. What? That's exactly what Paul wrote the letter against. Anyway. Paul was having none of it. To summarize, Galatians 1:10, am I now trying to win the approval of human beings or of God? Or am I trying to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I would not be a servant of Christ. Paul wasn't afraid of those in his past, what they would have thought, those he came up with, those who taught him, those that he ran alongside, those that he persecuted the church with, those that he took all of the journeys with of learning and as he said, excelling in that environment that he was in. He's not worried about them, not worried about his teachers. He's not worried about anyone in the Jerusalem church. He makes it clear even to separate himself from that Jerusalem church, even from Peter. I'm not worried about what all of them are saying. I am only worried about one thing, the gospel of grace through Jesus Christ alone, that you do not have to come under religious obligation. You don't have to come under an old covenant that has been done away with. You don't have to come under the law to receive the grace and mercy that Jesus has made available to you freely. And Paul, I am not afraid to say that in front of anyone, anytime, anywhere. I am not trying to please people. I am only trying to please Jesus. We understand that fear, if he lived in that kind of fear, would limit his ability to preach the gospel of Jesus in its purest form. And he stood up to those who were bringing a different gospel to the churches in Galatia. He was astonished by them, how quickly they were turning away. And here's what we can understand from this. Religion has always used fear to try to manipulate people away from Jesus. And it started at the inception. And so a correct understanding and application of that scripture is to say, this has been a tactic of the enemy from the get-go, to come to people who are coming alive in Jesus and stand before them and say, you're not good enough. You're not doing enough. You are not looking the part enough. You haven't memorized the scriptures enough. You haven't come to church enough. You haven't started giving your tithe and offering enough. You're not in the right discipleship classes. You're still doing those things that you confessed that you would stop. You are going to have to put in so much human effort to get yourself to be acceptable to Jesus. And the fear replaces intimacy with Jesus that fast. And before we know it, we are worshiping a man-made idol of religion, and we are following a man-made idol of religion that looks like Jesus but requires us to make sacrifices that Jesus already made. And so from the very beginning, religion has been using fear to coerce you and me to behaviors and performances that Jesus isn't asking us for. And if there is one thing that I can bring into our moment this morning, it would be to say, I am so sorry to anyone in this room who didn't have a Paul to stand up for you in that moment when you were young in the faith and someone told you that it was more about your behavior and your appearance than the condition of your heart before Jesus. I'm sorry for the marks that you bear of trying to self-improve and learn the right things and behave the right way. The heavy bondage of religion that has come upon you when you said yes to Jesus but instead received bondage that tied you up in inadequacy and in fear and in performance, which then led to shame, which then led to hiding, which then led to acting out your faith instead of getting to actually live it out. And when there is that great of a gap between what we are believing for and what we are actually experiencing, this is a measurement that can only mark pain. My heart, Paul's heart, is to stand before every single one of us, beside every single one of us who are coming to Jesus and saying, I just want you, Jesus. I want your transformative presence in my life. I want your spirit upon me. I want to look like you and act like you and behave like you and be known by you. And that we would protect the innocence of that moment and we wouldn't see religion bait and switch people any longer. Even if it looks good, even if it sounds good, even if it dresses itself up really nice on Sunday and holds a microphone and seems like it has authority, I would say the same thing that Paul said. If I teach you ever anything that takes what Jesus has done and offers you freely, and I put a contingency on it, a caveat on it, a smug little judgment on it. Yeah, but you got to act this way and do this stuff and blah, 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 blah. Leave this church. Leave it now. If you find yourself in a church that is so fixated on people's sins that they forget to talk about Jesus, leave it.